Hey everyone, this is Carlos, founder and CEO at Product School. Today I'm here with a special guest. His name is Ken Fine and he's the CEO at Heap. Hey Ken.
Hi, Carlos. How you doing?
Good. Thanks you for being on the show. You have an incredible track record in building businesses and products. So I want to start from the beginning. Why don't you tell us a bit more about your own story and how you got started?
I'd be happy to, and thank you, Carlos, for having me here today. Excited to have this conversation. My background originally was technical, so I started my career as a naval officer, and I worked for the Navy as an engineer and as a physicist. Did that for about 5 years, and during that time, really fell in love with the process of solving hard technical problems and doing it in team environments with the intent of building great technology and great products. After completing that process, my service of about 5 years, I became interested in applying some of that learning to private industry. So moved to California, came out to Silicon Valley, went to business school here, and then have spent the last now 20 plus years in high growth, predominantly in high growth B2B SaaS companies that are doing something interesting and disruptive with large amounts of data and some type of algorithmic intellectual property sitting on top of that data set to extract value from data. Started my career there in product. So a lot of my experience has been in product management, building the products, building product teams. Did that at a company called Financial Engines, and then at Medallia. And then over time moved into more general management roles, COO and now CEO.
And is there any common theme in terms of like problems that you are excited about solving?
Common themes for me are finding new ways to do things. So disruptive approaches to solving problems that have been around for a while. So in my case, the themes that have evolved are when people are trying to make sense of a lot of data. In the case of Medallia, for example, it was qualitative voice of the customer data. In the case of Heap, it's quantitative journey data. But how do you take all of this data and in some type of organized and technology-aided way, quickly and precisely find the insights that matter and act on them? So that's been a common theme. So a lot of data, a lot of math. And then how do you simplify the interface for consumption?
Yeah, what is the right balance between data and art? You've seen in product management, back in the day, it was more about the art. Like it was this misconception around, well, you have to be a visionary. You have to have these great ideas in order to build a product. But we are seeing how now, obviously, data is absolutely critical, and those micro iterations are much more important than those big swings sometimes. But I also think it's important to kind of balance. So where are you in that point?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a couple different dimensions to that for me. One is there's a balance between, this wasn't explicitly what you asked, but I think it's part of my point of view. There's a balance between quantitative data and qualitative data. So understanding in the case of Heap, quantitative journeys and clicks and events and interactions and time, and then qualitative data, specifically voice of the customer data. And I do believe that developing a total picture requires both, and truly getting, as a product manager, getting exposure to both not only helps you solve the problems, but starts to inform your intuition. You start to just understand your customers and how they think and where their challenges are. With respect to micro iteration versus Steve Jobsian vision, I do believe that as a product leader, you do need to be able to set a direction. So many people call that a vision. But what is the end point we're trying to reach? What does success look like? What is the change we're trying to make in the world? What are the problems we're trying to solve? And then I think you can approach that with lots of continuous improvement, Kaizen, as the Japanese would call it, in manufacturing systems. I don't think every step along the way has to be a step function breakthrough.
And I think another part that I've noticed in general as building products is that data used to be owned by the data team. And now we're seeing how this is being democratized. And it doesn't matter what title you have, you should be able to know what's going on and look at certain data. So how can, let's say, non-data people access and get insights from data?
It's a good point. So now, if you think about the way digital journeys, digital experiences have evolved just take a step back and I'll answer your question. You go back, let's say a couple of decades ago, the internet was largely marketing brochures. And if you now advance to today, it's the total experience. I mean, many companies are digitally native. Literally, that's all there is. There is no physical experience. As a result, the need for speed and agility has increased dramatically. You need to be able to experiment, you need to be able to learn quickly, you need to be able to make changes, understand the impact of your changes. And to do that, you do need to, and I believe, decentralize access to that data. So certainly, one of the ways you do that is through platforms like Heap, which are designed, though they can be consumed by centralized data teams. They are really designed from the ground up for practitioners, for product managers, also for marketers working on acquisition to understand the data and then have the insight surface in a way that is understandable for someone with that background. Meaning you don't have to have a PhD in mathematics or data science to understand what's coming out of those platforms, or you shouldn't.
So in this whole data world now, where we went from pretty much not many tools or like opportunities for non-data people to access data to probably too many. Like the market is crowded with so many different options. How would you position Heap? How makes Heap different?
Oh, that's thanks for asking the question. So in the world of what is now being called product analytics or digital product analytics, Heap's approach is distinctive in two ways. First, as it relates to the world of a product manager, if you want to understand the digital experience and the experiences of your users, differentiating point one is Heap captures the entire digital journey. So literally, if you went live with Heap today on July 14th, you're a new customer, we capture every digital interaction, every click, every swipe, every form submission, everything, and keep it forever, so that if something happens, or if you have a hypothesis, or if you want to drill down, it's all there. So you have a complete record of all interactions. That's piece one that's different about Heap. Piece two is new. So when I joined, my hypothesis about Heap was, wow, this is an impressive step one of technology capturing this data. But the real value, again, speaking as a former product manager, likely lies latent in this massive data set, meaning nuggets of value that we're not finding. We may not even know to look for. So what we've done now is built a data science layer that we've been working on for the last year and a half that's been purpose-built specifically from the ground up to leverage this massive data set and start to proactively extract the insights that are relevant to a product manager and understanding journeys in a way that you couldn't do manually. So now we can take these enormous data sets and very quickly get you to the nuggets and highlights within that data set that are relevant to your product.
I always joke that I met founding team at Heap many years ago when they were literally in a very small office in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. Now the team is obviously remote, but you guys have different offices across the US. What is the kind of a overall status of the business today?
Oh, in terms of the size and scope and location and all that. So what we have done in terms of just how we operate is we're operating in a I would describe it as a hybrid model where you can work virtually at Heap from any place in the world. We have retained our offices in San Francisco and New York. So for those who prefer to be in office, you can be in office. And we use that now for getting the team together and for enablement and training and for socialization. In terms of size, we'll be passing through several hundred employees this year and growing aggressively.
So as a CEO, I need to ask you this. What does your day-to-day look like?
What does my day-to-day look like? So when I think about, what I think the role of a CEO is, a few things come to mind for me. One is ensure the company has the right strategic direction. Are you pointing the ship in the right way? The second, do you have the right team? So it's both the right teammates, and are you doing the right things to enable them to make good decisions, to hit their goals? Do they have the resources? Do they have the right relationships? Do they have the right environment? And then the third is the right culture. And culture is can be an abstract and nebulous term. I think the biggest driver of culture, certainly one of them, our values. And to make values work, you need crisp, I believe, you need crisp stated behaviors that make values come to life, so people know how to act in a way that emulates those values. So my day, you asked, my day-to-day is like, if you were to take my day and color code it, probably 80+% is related to activities in service of evaluating and iterating and improving our strategy. So working sessions on that topic, lots of interviewing, or work with teams, skip level meetings, getting feedback, what's working, what's not working, how do we enable this team to be effective, and as well as working on modeling and training on values and behaviors. And then the last piece for me is always to be spending time with customers and prospective customers. So I believe in virtually any role, certainly a product role, you need to not only be explicitly gathering that feedback, but as I said, there's a non-obvious benefit that I think a lot of people miss as it relates to spending time with customers, which is it informs your intuition. You just start to think and feel the way your customers think, and therefore you're able to make decisions better and faster. So between those four items, I think that rounds to the vast majority of my day each day.
Yeah, I'm always curious because as a product CEO as well, who used to spend more time in product than now, I always like to see what is the right balance, right? Like in your case, I like what you said about always finding time to connect with customers, regardless of how many other things you have going on, to not lose that finger on the pulse.
Absolutely. Yeah, don't hide behind dashboards. Get out there, talk to customers directly.
So, I mean, you've mentioned you worked as an engineer, you've worked in finance, in data, and different leadership roles. Is there any mark of great leadership or something that you see, well, this is probably what helped me get to where I am?
I think so. I don't think there's one single leadership model. So to some degree, you need to understand who you are. And you and I were talking before about there's no one recipe for a CEO. There are different ways to be successful as a CEO, but I have developed a point of view on leadership, and certainly one that I embrace and one I've seen in strong leaders that I seek to emulate. There's basically three pieces to it. One is around leadership, culture, and philosophy. And I believe some of the most effective, most impactful leaders that I've worked with, teamed with, worked for, and as I said, I'm trying to emulate myself, are those that balance two things that are often seemingly in tension, but I think you can actually, well, to be great, I think you really should try to do both. One is accountability, and the other is empathy. So by accountability, I think strong leaders are very clear about what is success. How do we know if we're successful? If it's something that can be measured, how do we measure it? Who owns it? Who's the single person that's accountable? But you balance that with empathy, being a good human being, being supportive, providing support, the support that people need. It's almost through the empathy and the support, I believe, that you earn the right to hold people accountable. And great leaders, I believe, they find that special balance. I've worked with people who are heavy on the empathy and less on accountability, and vice versa. The second piece for me is I think strong leaders are good at setting a clear strategy and direction and vision, whether it comes from someplace within or through a group development process or working with customers, but that's a place you need to get to. People need to know what success is and what we're trying to achieve. And then the last is actually came to me through a book I read. Name of the book is Multipliers. I think it was written by Liz Wiseman. You can look it up on Amazon. And it's a book about leadership, and specifically certain types of leaders who are unusually good at getting an outcome or building teams that are better than the proverbial sum of their parts. So very good at getting people to perform at their collective best. And there are a series of tactics and strategies advocated in that book, which came from a study of leaders, that I've tried to learn and move myself more and more in the multiplier direction.
And I can totally see your eyes brightening when you talk about leadership and growth. So I'm sure you're also learning something new. It never stops. So what are you curious about learning these days, and how do you make time for it?
Yeah, good question. So it's the different types of things that I focus on learning. So I believe, take one step back. So when I graduated from business school, I started as part of an early team just after this particular company was founded, a company called Financial Engines. And I was there for a long time. So I was there from basically founding through growth, through IPO, post IPO, and then left. And when I left, I did some reflection and thought about, well, what's next? And part of what's next for me was, what stage of company? Do I want to be a founder? Do I want to go in that early, seed, Series A? Do I want to go in later? And I made a decision, having seen a long journey to now a public company that was multi-hundred million in revenue when I left, that I wanted to focus on the growth stage. That was an area that I found particularly exciting. Once you had some level of product market fit, you're now starting to scale, go to market. And I view that, now getting to your question on learning, as an art form, as a craft. And I've tried to embrace growth stage leadership as my craft. And before, my craft was that and product, and now it's moved on to product in the broader sense, running product facing organizations and companies. So the areas I focus on are, one, my skills as a leader and really understanding growth stage dynamics. I do that in part with a coach. So I have a coach. I'm a part of an organization called 10X CEO, which helps pair CEOs with other CEOs building similar companies. You have it's almost like an external board of directors. And then the other area I focus on specifically is product-led growth, since that is a as I'm sure your listeners are very aware of, product-led growth, that is a newer and rapidly developing evolution of go-to-market motion, and then figuring out. I don't view product-led and sales-led necessarily as two totally separate worlds, but rather there's an artful integration of the two. So that's another area that I'm educating myself on frequently, reading, listening, talking to people who have been successful in that area, and figuring out how to bring that effectively to Heap.
I mean, every time I talk to a CEO or an executive, and they're curious, they're always learning something. And I think that's important to point out for people out there. Like, this game never ends. Doesn't matter how much we've accomplished. It's all about how much we can learn, how hungry we are to do that. And most of the times that's related to work, but it can also be learnings related to life that somehow you end up connecting to other areas of your life, and that's okay too.
I totally agree. In fact, I sometimes marvel. At this point, I've been doing growth stage companies since late '90s, so over 20 years, and I'm still actively learning. There's still lots of trial and error and failures and setbacks and debriefs, and saying, okay, here's what I've learned. Now let's up my game. In fact, in my case, one of the reasons I'm at Heap is after my last company was acquired, I did some reflection and made a personal decision, which was, I felt that I hadn't yet done my best work. I hadn't yet made the biggest contributions that I can make. And I felt that I couldn't stop and take a break until I had made those contributions. And that's really all about learning.
Love that. And I also appreciate what you said about investing in yourself and having a coach and a peer group. Personally found that also very valuable, because sometimes it's just not playing the role of the mentee or the mentor. Like, it changes, right? And I don't think that just one person alone can give you everything that you need, but like having that collective knowledge from different people, it's growing at the same time. It's really powerful.
Strongly agree. Any one person could give you a nugget, just one nugget of advice or insight or direction that resonates with you. You grab it, you run with it, you apply it, maybe you implement it at your company or on your team, and has a big impact. I mean, I can pick certain mentors I've worked with that had disproportionate impact on specific areas of things they coached me on.
And Ken, when we think about building products, like, a lot of people kind of assume that they have to quit their job and go all into the next thing. And there's this disconnection, because it's no traditional school that is teaching that, although of course we're trying to help. But in reality, have you seen examples of people who can leverage Heap or other tools out there to build something on the side, to learn, to prove that they can do it before they commit to something more permanent?
I have, and I've done that myself as well. I do think eventually you get to a point. It depends on what the bet is and what you want to build. Eventually, you get to a point where you have to make a decision. Do you want to bet on X and then give it the proper focus? But I absolutely personally experienced and seen Heap also used as a toolkit to basically test a direction, test a hypothesis, test an idea. So in my case, this is a non-Heap example. When I was at this company, Financial Engines, the team I was with, we had a hypothesis about a particular product direction that leveraged some of our current technology, but was very different in terms of the economics, dramatically different, meaning if this direction was successful, it could mean an enormous pivot for the business. So the way we, as you put it, kind of tested the side bet was we said, all right, let's take, and we time boxed it. We said, we're going to take, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks. And we took a small team and we worked intensely on developing a hypothesis, creating some prototypes and mock-ups, getting out with customers. And we still had our day jobs. And then we came back to the broader company and said, hey, take a look at this. Here's what we're thinking. And here's some initial feedback. And the initial feedback was so compelling that the long story short was we ended up pivoting to that product and actually ended up ultimately pivoting the whole company. But it wouldn't have happened had not a small group of us got together and said, I just think this is a better direction. No one's willing to believe us yet. So we got to do something, and we're going to have to put it on our backs a little bit. We're going to have to carve out some extra time and some extra energy so that we can bring back something. And then maybe we're wrong, and then we'll learn that as well. So I do think there's a place for that. And I think that's where great leaders and great initiative often shows up.
Yeah, I love that analogy. And some people, Amazon, they call it like the 2 pizza teams. Like when you are too big, at some point, it's hard to keep your eyes on the ground. And like creating a small squad that can lead a specific initiative, test something before they over invest in it. It's important no matter what the size of the company is. And I think if anything, now it's probably less complicated based on the tools that we have. I remember back in the day, you pretty much had to be an engineer and reinvent the wheel in order to build something digital. Now, thanks to tools like Heap and others, you can build something without code. You can put it out there. You can get data and focus more on adding value rather than recreating the next big website.
I'd agree with that. And I think the key to those types of ideas, explorations being successful meaning that you may prove that it's a good direction or not, in my opinion, is to be hypothesis driven. So be crisp about what it is you are trying to learn. Like really think about when you set up. In fact, I'll use an example. I once had a mentor when I was working on an exploration, a hypothesis I had, and says, well, Ken, why don't you write down the report, is what he called it, that show the results of the thing you want to test before you run the test. And I looked at him confused. How could I write the report for the results before I run the test? He says, just trust me, just create a fictitious report, 1-pager. And what I learned from that exercise was that it forced me to think much more rigorously about, well, what am I trying to prove? What is my hypothesis? What are the metrics that I want to see? What is, red, yellow, and green? What is successful here? What is unsuccessful? And as a result, I dramatically changed my test. And now I had a test where the outcome would prove or disprove my hypothesis better. So that would be that is one learning I've had around these explorations.
That's a good point. I think when we try to create a hypothesis, we are ultimately biased towards validating that hypothesis and thinking broadly about, well, maybe disqualifying the hypothesis is success as well, and going there more with an open mind rather than trying to guide the experiment can ultimately lead to what you want, which is the truth, instead of just your own vision for your product.
You're right. Fail fast can be a success. And I think creating a culture where that is recognized and even rewarded is a good thing. And I would say, as I look back, my experience as a product leader running product teams, often a role that I would take was in working with a team that was running some type of test or doing some type of exploration. Sometimes the role I would take would be to push the team on, hey, this is our 3rd or 4th or 5th rev of this idea, and the results don't seem to be changing very much. And I know the team is very attached to it. You're very excited about it, but maybe it's time to kill this. maybe this isn't the right way. We're pivoting, we're not progressing. So I don't want to slow down people's enthusiasm for pursuing greatness, but there is also a point to say, hey, maybe this isn't the right idea. It's okay. Let's generate other ideas.
That is so hard, like to kill a feature, especially if it's kind of working.
Yeah. It is difficult. It takes courage.
So for people out there who are working in product, what would you say could be something tangible that they can take home today and help them grow their career?
That's a good question. I would say there's a few things. If I were to answer the question this way, if I were a product manager today, and somehow I knew everything that I now know, so I have the benefit of 30 years of working in technology and 25 years in B2B SaaS companies. The things that I would invest in are the following. I'm not saying this is the only way to get to a good outcome, but this is just what I actually would do. One is there's three areas that I would focus on personally. One is I would really ensure that I have a good understanding of basically fundamental dev technology. So that doesn't mean you have to get an undergrad in computer science, though. I suppose if I were in undergrad now, it's probably what I would study. That could mean self-teaching. It could mean doing a 6-week boot camp, but have some understanding of the implementation. So for me, that's piece one. Like if I could reset now, go back 20 years, that is what I would do. Number two is I've learned design. Like I think the power of understanding the tech and the communication layer, and which is really for me all about communication. How do you communicate complex things in simple ways? So understanding interaction design, visual design. It doesn't mean become a designer, well, you certainly can. But I'm saying even as a product manager, understand that piece. And then the third for me is develop a toolkit around customer intimacy. Like how do you understand customers? What is if you go parachuted in today to a new organization that you're running or a part of, and someone said, hey, how do you understand customers? And we talked about this at the beginning a little bit, what's your quantitatively, qualitatively, what tools do you use? What practices have that? And I think if you have all three of those, now you have the ability to understand the customer situation, their problems, and test different solutions. And you have a sense for implementation possibilities. You have a sense for what technology can do. You have a sense for design. You can help with prototyping and quick learning. That would be my trifecta if I could go back as a PM today.
You literally painted the picture that we show to a lot of students, which is like that PM sits in between technology, business, and design, or technology, design, and the customer. And I think that's great. Kane, it's been a pleasure to learn from you. Thank you for your time.
Likewise. Thanks for having me today, Carlos.